Welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessie CHAHAL. In this Jiwa Merdeka edition, we explore how patriotism can evolve in the age of artificial intelligence and whether AI can help strengthen national identity. Joining me today to explore this is Dr. NIRWANDY NOORDIN, Fellow of Psychological Operations at the Center of Media and Information Warfare Studies at UiTM. Welcome, Doc. It's good to speak to you again. And what an interesting perspective or lens looking towards what AI can really bring to the table. Let's start with the idea of Jiwa Merdeka. Literally, that would translate to mean the soul of independence. How would you define this in sort of the AI perspective or an AI-driven world?
If we look into the current context of Jiwa Merdeka, it's important for all the Malaysia to have the sense of unity, the sense of belonging to a national element, nationhood, which is we are as a nation. But when we look into back into what you mean just now by looking into the lens context of AI, this is something going to be very interesting, but something that also can be worrying. So we have to go through this by looking into what become the consequences, what are the elements that we have to look through to foster the elements of this AI, particularly generative AI, to what it can do to our Jiwa Merdeka, what the sense of nationalism, the sense of the nation state that we have, whether it will bring the element of positivism, although we go the other way around, on how do we reflect in upbringing the nation together. So this Jiwa Merdeka representation is important for carrying the nation unity flags across the board, whether we are, regardless of our ethnic, cultural identity, race, religion, and whatsoever. But in total part is that how this Jiwa Merdeka can be a sense of belonging to all nation citizens in the reflections of all this AI generative content, and of course we talk about the AI-related AI generation today.
Right, I mean, it's a good time to sit and reflect on the power of AI. It does seem at points though that AI can really go the extreme, be extremely helpful or perhaps extremely disruptive in that manner. As someone who's deeply involved in operations where the psychology is concerned, also looking at media warfare, how do you assess Malaysia's current national identity? Is it strong? Is it fragmented? Or is it work in process that we are still evolving?
Yeah, very interesting question. I think first of all, we have to understand that as a Malaysian, I think we are proud to be a Malaysian citizen. If we look into from particularly in the social media content, we can look at how the situation have evolved from getting to know each other in a very traditional way, evolving into the social media context, and now we're basically putting up, developing patriotism with the AI. So when people are sharing what are the elements that we have in patriotising and putting up the elements of this AI generative contents. But the main thing that you hear, as we talk into the element of social media representation, we see that people are basically enjoying their life. People basically sharing their cultural identity, sharing the values, and all the elements that we share today, from food, from expenses, from we go travelling, from we go to meet our loved one. So basically, it all in a positive context. But however, the fragmentaries arises when at some certain situation, there might be a situation, there might be some social cultural clashes that happen to be looked from the lens of the cultural and racial identity.
Give us an example of what that may look like.
I think we have some crisis. Of course, this is something to do with something that might be unintentional or intentionally subject to what have been proven by the court. For example, the use of some brand by using also some sensitive religious elements or some notion of some situation that somehow when there are some elements of social context that somehow it goes between the fragmentary of ethnic, race and religious issue, then we can see the fragmentary of social media element works, which is something I found it very disturbing in our form of social media sharing. But as long as it's involved into positivity, like sharing the process, helping each other out, sharing some content, visiting each other, and praising the other reflections of cultural identity. So we are basically moving into that lens, which works very well towards nations. But once there are the interference of that, particularly we involve something a little bit much more sensitive, the political context, so the lens started to change. So the shift of the lens of social media is something that goes by into some provocation, some element of fragmentary, particularly when it moves into political context, some 3R issues. So it started to be looked into some, I would say that, devastations of seeing that happening in our country. I would just like to ensure that this is not something that we have to be proud of. I've been monitoring this element. For example, when there are some situations when we are happy, when we have some formalities, okay. But when there are some social issues, some social context issues, then people start to define it from a very fragmentary element. So we have this type M, type I, type FC. I would just say that we need to flush all these things back and have to go back to the reality that we are once as Malaysia. So, but in generally, if there's no crisis, social crisis, that's how we say that. Defining social crisis is very subjective, but if there's no social crisis, I would say that we live in a very quite unique identity, our cultural multiculturality, our
and so much more must be done with the assistance of AI to help preserve and promote that. But as you've highlighted some of these social issues that may arise, these things have already been flagged, as you've pointed out. How then, or what are the preventive or preemptive measures to ensure that it doesn't, spread or become an issue?
I think our government is on the right track. We have been proven using some kind of elements. There are some what we call the ratifications or looking back into the CMA Act, Communication and Media Act 1998. They're now the platform of media social. All the providers and for the media social and of course the internet providers have to be licensed. So this is a good start for us to look into that.
But the problem I feel is that AI, to a large extent, is rapidly spreading and rapidly growing, evolving as we speak. And the worry is of the deep fakes and the fact that AI is so real-like in this day, which I find myself to be quite well versed around what AI can and cannot do, but it's becoming a more grey area. It's harder to understand whether one is real or one is not. And so, given that, to an audience that is basically accepting feed from their social media platforms, this poses a real threat, Doctor.
Yeah, I do agree with you. So this is what called different between AI and generative AI. AI basically basic things that humans can do. AI can be using it to monitor and to expedite the thing to do. But generative AI mostly talks about content, something that can be provided, something that can be created from elements of codings by prompt, and eventually we have all the elements. We can have our own songs today. We can have our poster, we can have our own video, we can prompt everything. In fact, prompt has become a professional terms today. We need to learn on how to prompt. Of course, you can contact me to learn about that later on. But the main thing here on how this prompt also can have the elements of looking into what are the elements of prompt that we need to work Jiwa Merdeka from. Perhaps we have to have our Jiwa Merdeka from. We need our AI generative prompt for patriotism, for our national belonging system. So this is something that people have to understand, that there can be a sense of manipulation. In fact, if we look into some troublesome that happens when we talk about generative AI in that form context, it can be manipulated. It can have high deepfakes. We're talking about the AI bots. We're talking about synthetics agitations by looking into some fake content that can be synthetically manipulated, created to destroy a civilization.
With the voice effects.
With the voice effects. Because this is some point of people said this might be a point of exaggeration. But it shows that by some form of case of study, that's why we need a form of formidable law. That's why we need to have preventive measure that we have in Malaysia. Because if we don't take this as a new element for us to study, we are looking into a new generative AI content that can be used against us, whereas it can create a much more better effort of Jiwa Merdeka, patriotism level. So we need to understand the prompt. We need to understand the consequences. In fact, we need to understand the simple process of how algorithm works in performing the Jiwa Merdeka and elements of patriotism with the unity of the nation. So if we fail to understand this, so this is something that might be taken us back. So we might fall into, not say a trap, it might happen organically, but because the atmosphere of this information, the atmosphere of the synthetics, agitation, synthetics, apertures of these voices, this avatar, this persona, so we might be fall into some form of invalidity of this information campaign.
That's right. Always take a step back to appreciate or understand or clarify two things in terms of the context in which the message is being shared to you and the intention of it. If it comes from a negative intention, then one must be more open to questioning whether that is authentic.
I would say that if it just happened organically, let's say that we posted some positive content, so people are enjoying the content, but somehow or other, because the dynamics of the social media by itself, sometimes the environmental push you towards the negativity without utilizing that. So
Well,
this is the issues.
On that same point, Doctor, in terms of platforms promoting content via the social media, what platforms are youth most active on? And I just perhaps don't close this question on youth, but all age groups. What risks do we face when there is a sense of national identity that's being redefined through AI?
I think first of all we have to go to the basic concepts of identity. We need to understand how is unity value towards these identifications of Malaysian unity works. If we fail to hold into the basic element of the federal constitutions and our proud negara, so we fail to understand what's our true identity of nation. So when technology will come, in fact we're now talking about AI, we have talked about big data before. Big data is just something that's normally known as a basic element now. We talk about algorithms, now we talk about AI, now we talk about generative AI. We don't know what's next. We might have some robotic AI generative plus. We never know. So it might be a new form of terminology of technology, but we need to carry our identity with that. So in that words, that's why Jiwa Merdeka is important.
Looking upwards and forward towards what can be done to further enhance, our identity on this sort of a national note, which AI tools can really help? And what does a responsible strategy look like? Earlier you said we must jog back to understand what national identity should look like. So with AI in mind, what should that responsible strategy look like, or where is that starting point? Because AI and its messaging will happen across multiple platforms, across multiple sectors, multiple layers of society, for different sectors and industries. And it's intricate, it's complex.
It's a very interesting, very nice question, because when we have the interpretations of lens in social media, in AI, particularly we use social media, we look into the internet penetrations in Malaysia, I think we are more than above 97, 98%. Around 35 population of Malaysian citizens. So if we look from the social media lens, how we interpret content from the representations of conceptual lens of patriotism. So how do we define our patriotism lens? How we see things differently. So this is important for us to understand what is the meaning of deepfake. A basic identification of what is deepfake, what is disinformation campaign, and of course what is psychological operation, which is my line of expertise. But moving towards that, at least we need to understand what are the elements of bots. How can bots manipulate us? We are looking now into a very synthetic elements of people can come up with some form of generative AI. They can have their own voice. I can have your own voice.
Yeah.
And you have been promoting some kind of products. I can have your own voice talking about some political inclination. I even have talking about some elements of ethnocentric. So this is the dangerous elements of ethnocentrisms, political inclination, some 3R issues that can be emulated by bots and synthetic AI generative or generative AI. So this might be a basic requirement for all the person to identify. And this have to come through educations and the level of internet penetrations across Malaysian.
That level as well, but also the education and awareness that comes with it. You mentioned a little bit about, the kind of content that's out there and understanding the responsibility, what national identity should look like, and that strategy behind it. But from a approach where content is being pushed towards a vast audience, psychologically, Doctor, what are the elements that attract people to stick to a message or go with that attachment?
Propaganda is supposed to be a positive notes. In fact, if we look into the real connotation of propaganda, definition of propaganda is supposed to be into the group value, but people have mistaken propaganda for negativity.
Right.
So being a propagandist is actually not meaning that you have to be a bad guy, bad person. But the elements of nature of social media have, at some point, it have started to provoke some form of negative terms. People are trying to use it for some replications of identity. People try to make it look into some content that manipulated to have this information campaign. And sometimes people does not believe that is the real thing they are doing, because in the reality of the social media, in the reality of looking into the perspective of what we call the element of Malaysian unity. So this is something that we need to carry along if we our daily routine. We need to have the identification. We need to put everything in the context of patriotism, of our national identity. But somehow or rather, we get carried away because we cannot see what our true Jiwa Merdeka identity, because the influx of information, because the multiple identification, multiple polarizations of thought, belief and values have made us to believe that what is seems as the term says echo chamber, which is sometimes we talk about positive economy, but let's say we go like hiking, we go by sports, we go by any form of bicycling, playing futsal, or even go something fishing or something that having a very positive echo chamber. So this is something that people really dwell into. People like start to sharing, and people have start taking opportunities, selling products, putting up some items, sharing some thought with people.
So the distractions and the trigger points are
the
many.
trigger point of positive echo chambers there. But once there's an element of social crisis, one element of social context, there are people who try to manipulate. So that might be a detections of organic algorithm by us before we relying into the social media platform provider, before relying into the government. So we need to have that detections of algorithm. We need to understand what could be the consequences of people trying to manipulate or trying to distort.
That seems like a difficult task or system to build. Is there something in place?
It is something that we think that the government are really looking seriously on that. That's why there are some regulations that in place. We have not yet touched on the effect of the foreign interference. If we just reflect back into the current crisis, let's go back into the current crisis that we have between the Cambodia and Thailand. I've done some simple research just to understand what are the consequences and what are the effects. And surprisingly, the element of nationalism played by both parties of the citizen really found that we are basically, I mean ASEAN, basically looking into the clash between a civilization that goes into the culture, racial and ethnic values that somehow cause the conflict to escalate.
Right. Well, we're glad that the Prime Minister will be sitting with both leaders to iron out some of those issues as well. Now we look at the argument here, Doc, where a lot of people are assuming or has this presumption that today's youth are generally more globally open-minded and they are much less nationally rooted. That is up for a whole other conversation. But do you see this as a challenge or opportunity in terms of building the national identity and patriotism that we speak of?
I think when we talk about patriotism, we talk about Jiwa Merdeka, basically talk about our cognitive values. So it's about ideas, belief and values. Of course, it's much more better for the youth. In fact, we have been used to be a youth before. So the agenda settings of the youth, those days are different within these days because they are much more blessed with information, blessed in sense that they get much more opportunity to define what is good, what is bad and what is modern. Modernization does not equal to westernization. This is a very inaccurate quotes or correlations. Modernization have to define by our own constitutions of Federal Constitution and Rukun Negara. So that's how we need to define our own form of modernization. So how do we get that to do by the youth? Because youth are basically open to all these elements back. So by blaming youth, I think it's not their fault. Actually, the environment of social media, the environment of defining what are the true values of Jiwa Merdeka, patriotisms, the elements of unity, is something that we need to put the echo chamber together. Because when we started to have some element, again we go by crisis, because much of the social crisis started to become a clear departure of what we're holding on. So when there are social crises, there might be a mediator. They need to put a stop on social crisis, on 3R, so interference.
So what I'm hearing you say is there should be more stakeholders and not pin it just down on youth. So where then and who are these stakeholders? Educators, the government, technology platforms. Shouldn't they then all together play a larger part and a more active role?
So this goes into the psychological warfare part. We need to go by technology, we need to go by hybrid, we need to go by traditional elements, we need to put up the representations of the ideas of unity in the form of that block. Because when there are segregation, true segregation that happens in the form of Jiwa Merdeka, patriotism. For example, let's define what is patriotism. In looking into the true value of nation states that carry our own identity of culture, belief and values. But somehow or other, when there are some people try to push another set of cultural identification values that goes beyond the reality of understanding what are cultural identity. For example, they started to argue about element of race issues, ethnic issues, some religion issues, some equations of equality. So they created a kind of discourse in the context of the social media. Why we are bringing social media? Because social media is a platform to understand the reality of what we're discussing today. The echo chambers of situation, the suboptimal zone of people discussion. So when there is that opportunity, so then this all generative AI will come. People
so
will
as a
start,
powerful
yes.
tool it is, it's also equally a dangerous weapon if not
Because people will try to
handled
participate, and
or
when people
managed.
try to participate, particularly they use, of course not saying that they use to have the kind of the capability, people will try to prove their content. People try to show that they have the capability using the generative AI. But once they look into the crisis from different lenses, which is the lenses not from Merdeka Patriotism, so that we created a form of segregation. So we need to be careful of this social crisis actually.
Can you point out to any existing initiatives, whether here in Malaysia or abroad, where technology is being successfully applied and used to nurture a concept, a value of national identity? And what would you say would be the single most important step that Malaysia must take now to further foster that sense
I think our Minister Fahmi
identity?
Fazil have done pretty good works in addressing the problem and issues. I think we have sebenarnya my 3MCMC to have become a fact check. We have chatbot IFA, artificial intelligence fact check system, and moving to section 252, for example, is getting all the data based, whether it's synthetics, whether it's a true organic data, for all the identification, for them to reveal the social media platform, for them to reveal who are the identity behind that. And we are getting the social media and internet user provided to be licensed. So I think in the context of regulations, we might miss out one of two important regulations, such as the foreign influence element, because in the context of domestic apparatus of social misbehavior of using social media,
Right.
I think we are well covered. But we're talking about foreign influence, that's another subject matter that we have to discuss. But I think the government have done a pretty steadily job. But the main worries here is the social crisis situation that need to be monitored, and the intervention element using the psychological warfare, technical element. We might have our own prompt AI bots. We might have our own prompt synthetics AI that can look into as a form of intervention to provide any form of dislodging environment situations that can create or distort Jiwa Merdeka and nationalism element. So this is the situation I think across the board, if we look into generative content, I'm already pretty proud of Malaysian. There are very positive element here. We share contents and think we can share some symbolism. Of course, there are some situations that Malaysian flags have been changed because this is the creation of AI basically moved to LLM. So as long as it progress, I think it will be more sharp in terms of designs and more accurate. But the idea of creativity is there. You can see that people started to share content, flooding with some generative AI, putting up their songs, putting up their poster. I think the issue is steadily positive, and I would say that in the sense of some simple representations of ethnography, I would say that it is steadily in a positive note. But the main question here again, the social crisis that deepen and disvalue our Jiwa Merdeka and patriotism element.
So moving forward, what is your vision then as we look towards the future where AI is in the front seat of everything? How do you see Malaysia's national identity pan out?
I think we need to have a centralized prompt of Jiwa Merdeka, patriotisms. In fact, we can have a few prompts from them to learn. And from
For
them,
example, walk us through one.
Let's build up Malaysian flag with a very beautiful blossom Malaysian flowers identity, culture, kampung style, urbanic style, youth style. So people will go there. So in fact, any Jiwa Merdeka patriotisms games, or in fact competitions, have to be based by generative AI prompts. So we need to educate what we that, and then we go by comparative value. So what be happening in some crisis situation, for example, what happened in Cambodia, what happened in Thailand, what happened in Pakistan and India. The participation of deep fake news, agitations, synthetics apparatures of identity just to show that which part is correct and wrong is something very disturbing. I mean that it works into that there are some specialized units of psychological warfare using this as tool to win a war for certain countries. Just imagine it happen in our countries. Just imagine there are some foreign interference, because we talk about AI is borderless. So we must have, again, it's not an exaggeration. We must have a sense of understanding a threatening situation. There are lots of possibility. People basically in Malaysia, we are very proud of ourselves. I think we carried ourselves really well. But when there are some social crises, there might be some opportunity for intervention. There might be some misinterpretation of situations, and people can tend to get carried away by the wrong echo chambers. Because once the bandwagon concept has started to fall in, people started to participate, and the environment itself will be a deciding factor on how we move towards the issues. And this is something that we talk about, the element of bandwagons, that people using the term as FOMO, fear of missing out. So during the Merdeka parade, people are basically pushing them ahead to get the front row of the seat to watch all this Abang Bomber, to watch all this Merdeka parade.
Right.
But the same thing happens when it goes into negative echo chambers.
Such an interesting conversation and an interesting area to look at as we acknowledge the fact that while AI is a powerful tool, we must also be cognizant of the fact that it can be disruptive to a certain extent, and it is a tool for warfare in that aspect as well. But our radar is up, and as we move forward in the digital age, let's remember this: patriotism isn't just about symbols or slogans or pictures, but how we shape our values, identity and unity, even through the usage of technology. Well, that's all for this Jiwa Merdeka edition of The Nation. I'm Jessie Chahal. Thanks for watching, and be sure to follow us for more in-depth conversations on issues that matter. Bye-bye.